Vishika ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Technology. Her passion is
Thank you,
learning
Dr.
progress
RMD,
today.
for the
So let's
very
give a warm
kind introduction. Uh, so, hi guys, I am your quiz master for today. How are you people doing? How is your prep coming along? So, I hope you guys are doing well, and you guys are preparing well. And one thing that I want to tell you, especially about my subject, is OBG is one of actually the simplest majors that, and I keep saying this again and again to anybody who asks me, and sometimes even when people are not asking me. OBG is actually one of the simplest majors in your entire MBBS curriculum, and it is actually one of the easiest to crack for your NEET PG entrance or INI entrance, because it is a limited syllabus subject, and it is also very very conceptual. So if you study with your concepts, and it's, it's never too late. Maybe, during your MBBS final prof you were not able to do very well, but if you take some time, devote some time, and be a little conceptual about it, OBG is actually the simplest major out there, and you'll do well. And it's quite important that you do well in OBG because uh, every year, in every session, every exam, OBG is a major stakeholder when it comes to questions. On an average, you will have somewhere between 20 to 30 questions. Sometimes it's between 25 to 30, directly or indirectly from OBG. And the best part about OBG, compared to, I think, other majors like medicine and surgery, is that it is definitely 100% possible to get full marks with the base or knowledge that we get in MBBS. So that is all I had to tell you. And this is one subject where I think if you give a little bit of time to sort of clear your concepts, बाद में, like later when you are revising, you will have to devote less time to OBG, and that time can really be utilized for some other subject that you are weak at. So that's it from my side. A little bit of gyan before starting the quiz. So over to you, Dr. RMD.
We are so glad to have you, ma'am. So, this is the first time we are conducting a paid quiz event and with a big cash prize for the first time in Juxtamed YouTube channel.
Oh, that's really
So,
exciting. Yeah.
yeah, so when we had this OBJ, so the we were thinking like whom to invite for OBJ, because when we are conducting a quiz on such a big event on such a big platform, so we need someone great, someone eminent. So first we were skeptical regarding messaging you. We didn't know that you were so approachable, but as we can reveal to our audience that as soon as I texted you on your Instagram, you actually reverted back so soon. So we are so happy for it.
I am
So
very
so
humbled
grateful
in
to have
turn
you.
that you thought of me. So, yeah, thank you. So I am one of, I think, one of those educators who is the closest to the age of people who are preparing currently. So I can understand right now. My sympathies to all those people who are preparing. I do understand it's very difficult right now because the exam is getting very, very competitive, and there is no end to the information that is supplied to you, whether or not it's relevant. But yeah, I'm so happy that you thought of me and you called me. I'm honored. I'm very, very happy.
definitely, ma'am. Even our students are also very happy because we saw that as soon as we kept to as Quizmaster, the number of participation went high, and there is a lot of demand from audience also to have a quiz conducted by you. So, keeping this in mind, we'll go on to today's Juxtamed event. We'll be starting it in a few moments. So, let's move on to the quizzing screen. So all participants, be ready for today's paid event, paid quiz that is along with the cash prize. First prize, whoever wins gets 25% of the total cash money. Second prize takes home 15% of the total cash money. And third place takes home 10% of the total cash money. There is exciting offer for fourth place till 10th place. We are going to reveal at the end of the quiz. We haven't revealed it yet. So top 10 winners will be winning something in advance or in due. Okay. So we'll be seeing how many of them have joined. Total, we had 33 registrations for this quiz. So we'll be having total of 33 players. So 26 of them have joined. We'll be starting quiz at 9:10 p.m. sharp. Quiz will be conducted by Dr. Oishika ma'am itself. She is the quiz master and host for today's session. After the quiz, we'll be having a short explanation session where ma'am will be explaining you the concept behind these quizzes, these questions, and how these questions are being so useful for the upcoming NEET PG. Definitely these questions or similar questions you will be expecting in upcoming NEET PG. So we have already 28 players who have joined. So these 28 players have been had joined through the registration link that we gave. Rest of the participants who couldn't join the quiz can watch it on YouTube Live. Okay, so on YouTube Live you can watch the quiz very well, and then you can answer the question in YouTube Live section. So some of you might be thinking, what if someone copies the answer from YouTube Live? It is not going to happen because there is a slight delay, slight lag of around 10 to 15 seconds, during which time the questions will already be answered. So this quiz is based on precision and accuracy. It is based on time management. Whoever answers it correct and whoever answers it fast will get points. Even if you miss by a small microsecond or even a millisecond, you're going to lose 1 or 2 points, and that will decide your position. So we are almost ready for the quiz, and within few seconds, we are going to start the quiz. Dr. Manoj, are you ready?
Yes, sir. We can start, sir. It's 10:10.
Okay.
Almost.
Yeah. So we are going to start the quiz. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. RMD. So, welcome, guys. Welcome to today's quiz, starting with question number 1. A 28-year-old woman, Gravida to Paravan, comes to preconception and counseling. She had previously had a pregnancy with a child with a neural tube defect. Which of the following is the most appropriate management regarding folic acid supplementation in this patient? Option 1, there is no need of folic acid. Option number 2, start folic acid 400 micrograms at least 1 month before conception. Option 3, start folic acid 4 milligram daily at least 3 months before conception. Option 4, folic acid 10 milligram daily after conception. All right. So we have a total of 25 people who have given the correct answer, which is folic acid 4 milligram daily at least 3 months before conception. So guys, remember there are limited indications. The usual dose of folic acid given in pregnancy first trimester is 400 micrograms. There are certain conditions just like this, that previously there has been a child with neural tube defect. So folic acid is given for NTD prevention. But previously, if there has been a neural tube defect, then we give 4 milligram of folic acid, not only in the first 3 months of pregnancy, but starting 3 months before conception. There are other indications where the risk of neural tube defect is increased. Even on those mothers, we started preconceptionally at this dose. Things like mother having diabetes overt or mothers who are taking anti-epileptic drugs. Even in those cases, we have to give a higher dose of folic acid. Certain other conditions, like if the mother has sickle cell anemia, also in those cases, you can consider giving 10 times the dose of the usual dose. From 400 microgram, it goes to 4 milligram. So moving on to the next question.
So let's have a look at the leaderboard. So at the end of first question, Soumya is leading and Chandra Kumar. Both are leading with 85 points, followed by Mohan Kumar, Sai Krishna, and Rakshaya. 19 more questions to go, guys. Here is the second question.
Okay, so question number 2. A 32-year-old woman at 20 weeks of gestation undergoes a routine anomaly scan, and it was found that the nuchal fold thickness was 7 mm, Which of the following is the most appropriate next step in management? Option 1, you reassure her. Option 2, you repeat a scan in 2 months. Option 3, you deliver the baby immediately. And option 4, you insist on cell-free fetal DNA testing. So this is going to be close. So third position is trailing behind by just 1 point. So what did we get this time? Okay, so 16 of you have answered insist on cell-free fetal DNA. Okay, so because a lot of you have marked the other options, let's take a moment to look at this. So remember, one, there is something called gross congenital anomaly, like you would have studied, like keyhole bladder or anencephaly or lemon sign, banana sign, which are straightforward indications that this baby is anomalous and this baby will not survive, and let's do an MTP, in which case the answer would be immediate delivery. Things like absent nasal bone, things like increased nuchal fold thickness. Nuchal fold thickness, normal at 20 weeks of gestation should be below 6 mm. So this is above the cutoff. So definitely we are not just going to reassure the patient. Repeating the ultrasound in 2 months, again, no. We have already gotten an answer that this baby might have some abnormality. Now, the question is, should we terminate the pregnancy via an MTP or should we do further testing? So remember, all these things like absent nasal bone, increased nuchal fold thickness, other things like echogenic bowel, or short femur, short long bones, aberrant right subclavian artery. These are not out and out gross congenital anomalies. This means that the baby may be born normal or may be born abnormal. Therefore, we need to do a test to find out whether this baby is normal or abnormal. If it is abnormal, then we can advise a termination of pregnancy. But if the baby is normal, we can continue as we would in normal antenatal care. So we can go for invasive testing also, but invasive testing has certain risk of abortion. Invasive testing will give me 100% result. The next closest, next best is going to be NIPT or cell-free DNA, which is a screening test, but it gives me a report with 99% sensitivity. So the answer over here will be insist on cell-free fetal DNA testing.
Great explanation, ma'am. Moving on to the leaderboard. We have Mohan Kumar, who is leading right now at 169 points, followed by Rakshaya, Soumya, Sai Krishna, and at fifth place we have Harish Kumar. Moving on to the third question, guys.
A 28-year-old woman presents with secondary infertility and an HSG was done. It shows bilateral tubal blockage with irregular filling. Which is the most likely cause of this finding? A. PID due to chlamydia. B. Tuberculous salpingitis. C. Endometrial tuberculosis. D. Congenital tubal anomalies. So most of you have marked the correct answer, which is tuberculous salpingitis. Great. Two of you I see have marked PID due to chlamydia, and I really do understand the confusion because chlamydia is a very common cause of PID and it can also lead to bilateral tubal blockage. But one thing that I want you to notice in the picture that is given is the shape of the fallopian tubes. So sort of a lead pipe kind of an appearance towards the beginning, and towards the end there is a sacculation like a tobacco pouch. And if you don't see that, please look at the tube on the right side. The kind of beading and outpouching that you see, look at the question also, irregular filling. This kind of outpouching or sacculation is something that is very, very characteristic of tubercular salpingitis.
At the end of three questions, we have Sai Krishna, who is leading at 253 points, followed by Rakshaya, Mohan Kumar, Vishnu Priya, and Medha Shravya. The cutthroat competition that is there here is crazy.
So, a 25-year-old woman presents with a history of vaginal discharge, dysuria, and itching. Vaginal discharge is frothy, greenish yellow, and has a foul odor. The mucosa of the vagina is erythematous with petechiae noted on the cervix. What is the most likely treatment for this condition? A. Oral doxycycline. B. Topical clindamycin. C. Oral azithromycin. And D. Oral metronidazole.
I guess these are the type of questions which can be answered easily in NEET PG if they know concept, ma'am.
Definitely, definitely. Do remember, if you get these wrong, then you are automatically putting yourself behind a lot of other kids. But don't take these results too hard, because this is fastest finger first. Over there, you don't need to be fastest finger. Okay, so most of you have answered oral metronidazole, and the reason you have answered it is because what is the diagnosis? Over here, we are looking at Trichomonas vaginalis, typical green discharge with a foul odor. And what is this petechiae that is noted on the cervix is what we call strawberry cervix. So remember, in our PID kits also, when we are giving kit number 2, the green kit for vaginal discharge, there are two components. One for candidiasis, that was fluconazole, and other was secnidazole, which is from the metronidazole family. So for those of you who have marked oral doxycycline is one of the treatments that is used for PID. Over here, we are looking at vaginitis or vaginal discharge. Oral azithromycin is also a component of the PID kit. Topical clindamycin we are using nowhere. So the answer is oral metronidazole. Also, point to be noted, oral metronidazole is also the drug of choice for another vaginosis, not vaginitis, that is bacterial vaginosis. So even though it is not an STI, it can cause discomfort to the woman. So to treat that, we can give oral metronidazole there as well.
Wonderful explanation, ma'am. I guess no one will commit these mistakes, whoever is hearing to this.
Yes, ma'am.
So after 4 questions, we have Sai Krishna who is leading, and Mohan Kumar who is just behind with just 2 points behind, nothing else. And behind 4 points behind is Rakshaya, and then followed by Vishnu Priya and Medha Shravya. So it's a very close-knit competition. So there are
I
60 more
love how
questions.
the leaderboard is so unpredictable.
Yes, sir. So that reveals the level of competition.
Okay, coming to the next question. So the question is, when amniotic fluid volume reaches its peak, at what level does the fundus lie? A, at the level of the umbilicus, B, 4 centimeter above the umbilicus, D, below the xiphoid process, C, below the xiphoid process, and D, 2 centimeters below the umbilicus.
I think this question is a bit tricky, ma'am, because it involves two components.
Yes,
One is they should
definitely.
know when amniotic fluid will reach its peak, and second, they should know what is the fundus position at that gestational age.
True.
So even though it's one-line question, its depth is truly amazing.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, but despite a very deep question, I see most of you have answered it correctly, right? So what we are looking at here is basically what they're asking is, as Dr. RMD said, at what gestation is amniotic fluid the maximum? So it reaches its peak at around 32 to 36 weeks, being almost the maximum at 34 to 36 weeks, and thereafter it starts decreasing. So we know 36 weeks fundal height is when it is just below the uterus, the fundus is just below the xiphoid process. 4 centimeters above the umbilicus would denote a gestation of around 28 weeks. 2 centimeters below the umbilicus and level of umbilicus is like tiny baby, 20 weeks, 18 weeks.
Um,
Yeah. So the answer
um,
over here would be below xiphoid process. So just remember, that is how we are checking for our fundal height. From the upper level of the umbilicus, 4 centimeters above, like 4 finger breadths above or 4 centimeters above would be 28 weeks. 4 more above that would be 32. And right below the xiphoid would be 36.
So the leaderboard right now shows Mohan Kumar, who has gained a significant advantage right for this after this question, followed by Rakshaya, Sai Krishna, and Vishnu Priya jumped to 4th position, followed by Vanacha.
So actually, what has
So,
happened by the, giving them a very deep question is, although, the leaderboard might not have changed too much, the gap in points has increased, because some people might have taken a little more time to think what was being asked, even though
Right,
most
ma'am.
of them got it correct. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so a 30-year-old pregnant woman at 16 weeks of gestation undergoes a screening test as a part of routine prenatal care, and the results reveal an elevated HCG, elevated inhibin A, decreased estriol, and decreased alpha fetoprotein. Which of the following is the most likely diagnosis? A. Down syndrome, B. Neural tube defects, C. Preeclampsia, and D. Edwards syndrome.
For this specific question, I think people can narrow down the option to two options, but then lies which is increased in which condition. I think there everyone will be confused, ma'am.
Yeah, nobody's confused. Very few people are confused. So most of you have marked it correctly. So see, what I would say for aneuploidy screening as a part of the syllabus for NEET PG for undergraduates is you need to remember very few things. And the way I remembered it when I was prepping for my NEET PG was uh, high beta. So just say high beta. So high is high in Down syndrome. So H is HCG, I is inhibin. So if these two are high, then you're automatically looking at Down syndrome. Neural tube defects, remember, your alpha fetoprotein is going to increase. Preeclampsia screening is not being done that late in the gestation. It is usually done at the time of your 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks at the time of the dual screen, right? And Edwards syndrome, of course, you may get confused between Downs and Edwards, but Edwards will not have that higher level of HCG. It will not have a high HCG level actually.
Nice explanation, ma'am. So now even I'll remember this. No confusion. So Mohan Kumar has gained that advantage and is keeping the streak, followed by Rakshaya, Sai Krishna, Vishnupriya, and Vanaja. There is no change in leaderboard.
Come on, you guys can catch up. So next question is, patient in the second stage of labor experiences shoulder dystocia. The obstetrician decides to apply a maneuver to assist with delivery. Which maneuver is likely to be used? A. Pinard, B. groin traction, C. McRoberts maneuver, and D. Marisol smelly wheat.
I remember these maneuvers are repeatedly asked. So what I
Yes.
used to do for my NEET page was I used to bookmark those pearls or treasures and specifically go through them before I attempt JT. So
Yeah.
that used to reinforce my memory.
And it can be a picture question or, a question that is worded.
Mm, right, ma'am.
So again,
Eh,
no surprises. You guys are super smart. The answer is correct. McRoberts maneuver. All right. So for those of you who have answered incorrectly, so just look at the other maneuvers that are given. These are actually all maneuvers for breech delivery. McRoberts maneuver is the only one that is for shoulder dystocia. So how I remember what is Pinard maneuver? Pinard, P for pair. So when the baby is in frank breech, the legs are extended. So pair nikalne ke liye, to take out the legs, we use Pinard maneuver. Then you have one for nuchal arm, which is called Loveset maneuver. You do that. And groin traction again is to sort of help to deliver the buttocks. Marisol smelly wheat, how I remember is, you always have that picture in your books when the kid looks absolutely unhappy. He has two fingers on his cheeks and one on his nose. So I remember smelly from that. So MSV, Marisol smelly wheat, is for after coming head of breech. McRoberts maneuver. What is McRoberts maneuver? So shoulder dystocia, what is happening is the head has come out, but the shoulders are too wide to come out because maybe the baby has macrosomia or the mother is diabetic and there is a lot of fat on the baby's shoulders. So effectively, all the maneuvers that we are trying to do for shoulder dystocia is either to increase the diameter of the outlet of the pelvis or to decrease the diameter of shoulders of the fetus. So usually McRobert maneuver is not done alone. It is done with another maneuver, which is what? Suprapubic pressure. So simultaneously, in McRobert's maneuver, we are hyperflexing the hips of the mother. We are flexing the knees and hyperflexing the hips of the mother. So that is helping to increase the outlet diameter. And at the same time, right above the pubic symphysis, there is an assistant who is pressing on the shoulders of the baby. So what is happening is the shoulders, instead of being straight, that they are getting folded, and the effective diameter is decreasing. And 90% of your shoulder dystocia cases will deliver with a combination of these two maneuvers.
Wonderful, ma'am. Wonderful explanation. So at the end of 7 questions, Mohan Kumar itself is leading, followed by Rakshaya, Sai Krishna, Vishnupriya, and Vanaja. Moving on to the 8th question, anything can happen, guys.
So, a pregnant woman with no previous history of hypertension presents for routine antenatal care. She is at increased risk of preeclampsia due to obesity and a family history of preeclampsia. Which of the following is the most appropriate test to assess her risk for developing preeclampsia? A. MCA Doppler ultrasound. B. Serum uric acid measurement. C. Uterine artery Doppler ultrasound. And D. Umbilical artery Doppler ultrasound.
So, ma'am, is it true that more number of clinical-based questions like these are asked nowadays, recent NEET
Yes,
PG?
yes. So, what used to happen when at the time I used to so this is a question where a lot of you have been confused. So I'll just come back to this. And yes, Dr. RMD is absolutely correct that I took my PG entrance in 2018, I think. And at that time, there was a very clear distinction between the kind of questions that are coming in the INI papers and in NEET PG. There were more clinical questions in INI. And that is why we used to find it easier to crack, because you can think something and you can mark it. And NEET was more of one-liners, either you know or you don't know. But with time, I have seen over the years we are moving more and more towards clinical questions that requires critical thinking, clinical analysis, and maybe even a little bit of ward work and clinical work. So, just coming back to this question. So, MCA Doppler, MCA is middle cerebral artery. So, we are looking at the vessels in the head of the baby. Why we look at middle cerebral artery is because brain is, an important place where if the blood flow to the fetus decreases, MCA is usually the last to be affected. In fact, the opposite happens, because head is a part that needs to be saved. The blood is being redirected to the head. So usually what happens in stress situations is that you will see that the MCA flow is increasing. So if the baby is, for example, growth restricted, it will increase. Or if the baby is anemic, already the blood is thin, it will increase. So MCA Doppler, remember, is used for the diagnosis, not for screening of anything, but it is used for diagnosis of fetal anemia. The blood will be thin, it will flow faster. Number two, it is used for diagnosis of fetal growth restriction, because if the rest of the body is getting a low supply of blood, the fetus will try to preserve the blood supply to the brain and the velocity of the blood will increase. Serum uric acid measurement is something that increases if the mother develops preeclampsia. It is not used for screening of preeclampsia. Coming to the one that most of you were confused between, uterine artery Doppler and umbilical artery Doppler. So uterine artery Doppler, at the time, this is what I said a few questions earlier, at the time of your dual screen, uterine artery Doppler is one of the biophysical parameters that we are using to see whether this mother has a risk of developing preeclampsia or not. So basically what I mean to say is, if the uterine artery has blood flow with a lot of resistance, what is going to happen is the placenta and the baby are going to get less blood, more chances of the placenta not getting enough blood, having some necrosis, apoptosis, more of thromboxane A2 and all these mediators that cause preeclampsia being formed. Right, preeclampsia, remember, is a disorder of vasculature because the placenta is not getting as much blood as it should. So uterine artery is a direct indicator of that. Umbilical artery Doppler, the flow resistance will increase definitely if the mother has preeclampsia, but this is after she develops preeclampsia, not before. So uterine artery is used for screening. In the same vein, I would like to tell you, during the dual screen, there are two things that we are actually using during this time of 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks. There are two things that we are using to predict the risk of preeclampsia. One, as this question mentions, it is uterine artery Doppler. So the resistance in the uterine artery Doppler will increase. That will be one marker. And the other is something called PAP-A that you see in dual screen. So PAP-A is also a protein that is secreted by the placenta. So the smaller or more necrose the placenta or the lesser blood supply it is getting, PAP-A will be less. And a new thing that is coming up may be, one of those bouncer questions is placental growth factor or PLGF. Remember, all these three things are seen between 11 to 13 plus 6 weeks. You can make a note somewhere. These are the three things that are being used to screen for the risk of preeclampsia. And based on this risk, we can start aspirin so that she does not develop preeclampsia in future.
That's fabulous explanation, ma'am. And in the leaderboard, we have seen the tables being toppled up. So now Sai Krishna is leading at 639 points, followed by Vishnu Priya. Mohan Kumar is at third place, Raksha at fourth place, and Kushal is at fifth place. So tables have changed now.
Coming to question number 9. So the question is, a 28-year-old woman undergoes ovarian stimulation for IVF and presents 7 days after oocyte retrieval with complaints of abdominal distension, nausea, and vomiting. She has mild abdominal tenderness. What is most commonly the drug which can trigger this condition? A. Clomiphene citrate, B. Letrozole, B. Letrozole, C. GnRH antagonist, and D. HCG.
I guess this question they can't commit mistake, ma'am, because even I remember this from my NEET preparation.
Yes. This is again one of those questions which you cannot afford to get wrong. Oh, okay. So again, a little bit of confusion over here. I see a lot of people have marked everything but the answer, which is HCG. Congratulations to those who did mark HCG. So let's just talk about these things very, very quickly. So clomiphene citrate is a drug for ovulation induction. So is letrozole, right? So, and then you have GnRH antagonist. We'll come to that later. And then you have HCG. So remember, clomiphene citrate and letrozole are being used to produce eggs, but usually they will cause ovulation of one follicle, or letrozole will always cause formation of one follicle. And that is why letrozole is the most preferred drug for ovulation induction, because there is no chance of, unplanned multifetal pregnancy. When we talk about, and also because letrozole does not have a lot of other effects that clomiphene does. So clomiphene, two of the side effects why we do not prefer for ovulation induction, why we prefer letrozole is because remember, it is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. So it is doing different work at different places. So what clomiphene does is it causes development of more than one follicle. So when you are doing her monitoring, you might find that instead of one follicle being developed, she has developed 2 or 3 follicles, right? And the other problem with clomiphene is because it causes antagonistic action at some places. One of the places where it antagonizes the action of estrogen is the endometrium. So even though you're trying to get this woman pregnant, the estrogen is not being able to act on the endometrium, and you need the endometrium to be thick for pregnancy, but the endometrium remains very thin when we use clomiphene citrate, and that is why it is not preferred. A, multifetal pregnancy, the risk of that because they are more complicated pregnancies, and B, because the endometrium is thin. So often, even if the ovum is formed, fertilization happens, there is no implantation. So letrozole is preferred. Remember, when we are doing in vitro fertilization, it is an expensive process. It is also an invasive process. We are going to create lots of follicles. Then we are going to operate on the patient vaginally. We are going to extract a lot of these eggs, and then we are going to do IVF. So what I want in IVF is not 1 or 2 follicles. I want a lot of follicles. So what the drug that we are using to induce ovulation, to induce follicle growth in IVF is not these. We are using gonadotropins. We are using gonadotropins in the form of FSH. So FSH is used for IVF. So first off the bat, clomiphene and letrozole are not used for this. Next, GnRH antagonist. Why do we use GnRH antagonist? GnRH antagonist is not used to develop follicles. GnRH is actually used in an IVF cycle so that your ovulation does not happen prematurely. I want the follicle to be in a pre-ovulation state. If ovulation happens, I can no longer, properly fertilize it. So when the estrogen levels become too high because of all these follicles, the LH will start to rise, and this LH surge can cause ovulation. I don't want that, so I add GnRH antagonist. In fact, they are protective against OHSS. Now, coming to HCG. HCG we know is similar to two hormones. One is TSH and one is LH. So what we are doing is we are using HCG as a surrogate for LH. So we are causing an artificial LH surge by giving HCG. Now, when we give this HCG, what happens is it causes a lot of vasoactive peptides like VEGF to be released that increase the capillary permeability. And what happens is, as a result, there is ascites. There is loss of fluid from the blood vessels, so the hematocrit may rise, right? She may have nausea, vomiting, even pleural effusion. So always remember, OHSS, the causative agent is HCG, and the peptide that is causing all of these problems by this HCG release is called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. And all of this increases the more the number of follicles, because the estrogen level will also be high. GnRH antagonist, remember, is used for prevention of OHSS. Clomiphene citrate rarely, theoretically, can cause, but nowhere near the actual triggering agent that causes ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome.
Beautiful explanation, ma'am. I guess those are watching YouTube live. For them, it's like they have got these classes for free. They will definitely watch your live classes or on coaching platform. No doubt in that. So right now we have Vishnu Priya who is leading, followed by Mohan Kumar, Sai Krishna, Kushal Reddy, and Kirtana. With next question, we'll be moving towards one half of the quiz, and then we'll be having 11 more questions. Okay, so moving on to the next question, guys, we'll speed up a little bit.
So, a 32-year-old woman with a history of heavy menstrual bleeding and dysmenorrhea undergoes a pelvic ultrasound which shows a globular-shaped uterus with heterogeneous myometrial ecotexture and subendometrial cysts. What is false about this diagnosis? A. Uterus will be tender. B. Uterus grows beyond 12-week size. C. Menorrhagia and dysmenorrhea are complaints. D. Symmetrical enlargement is seen.
So again, a case-based question with different
Two
options which
parts.
look similar,
Yeah.
two parts.
Okay, so what are we looking at over here? What we are talking about, typical history. Heavy menstrual bleeding, there is AUB with pain. है ना? And globular uterus should immediately ring bells in your head with heterogeneous myometrial ecotexture and subendometrial cysts. What are these subendometrial cysts? These are actually in the myometrium. You can see islands of endometrium. And where do you see that endometrium within the myometrium? We are talking about adenomyosis. So uterus will be tender in adenomyosis. This is called Halben's sign, right? Menorrhagia and dysmenorrhea are the complaints that's already been given to you in the question, right? And symmetrical enlargement will be seen. Asymmetrical enlargement, a very close differential diagnosis of adenomyosis, is fibroid. But because fibroids tend to be lumpy at places, the enlargement will be asymmetrical instead of symmetrical. It can grow to any size. Adenomyosis typically does not grow beyond 12 weeks, and the uterus usually is non-tendered in fibroids. It will be tender in adenomyosis.
Awesome explanation. Moving on to the leaderboard, Vishnupriya is leading, followed by Mohan, Kirtana, Vanaja, and at fifth place we have Sai Krishna. Also on YouTube live chat, we are getting answer. Thea has commented uterus grows beyond 12 weeks. That's right, Thea. Congratulations. You can comment your answers in YouTube live chat also. We'll give you a shout out if you are right. Moving on to the next question. Also at the end of the 10 question, at the end of 50% of the round, we'll announce the top 10 participants. First is Vishnu Priya, followed by Mohan Kumar, followed by Kirtana K. At fourth, we have Vanaja, fifth, Sai Krishna. Also, Raksha is also at fifth place with same points. Seventh, we have Kushal Reddy. Eighth, we have Gomati. Ninth, we have Indu. And at 10th place, we have Sweti. So 10 more questions to go, guys.
The next question. A 28-year-old Gravida 3 Para 2 undergoes a cesarean section for fetal distress. Immediately after the placental delivery, she develops massive postpartum hemorrhage. Despite oxytocin, uterine massage, and fluid resuscitation, bleeding continues. Bimanual palpation is done, yet the bleeding continues. What are you going to do next? A. Foley's balloon tamponade. B. Total abdominal hysterectomy. C. Beelan sutures. D. Wait and give oxytocin.
Again, a clinical based question. If they've done their internship right, they'll get it.
Okay, so most of you have marked Beelan sutures, and I can understand why you wanted to mark Beelan sutures, but the answer will be Foley's balloon tamponade. So remember your PPH drill always. It is always going to be medical management followed by tamponade, because this is not a permanent or not an operative procedure, followed by compression sutures, and then stepwise devascularization followed by hysterectomy. Right. Now, I can understand why you guys marked Beelan sutures, because it does not make sense to you how to insert a Foley's balloon tamponade when the uterus is open, but we do it. We actually do it. So, what we do is we will insert a Foley's balloon or Bakri balloon through the incision in the uterus. An assistant will take out the other end vaginally and we will suture it. Despite that, if bleeding continues, we will do Beelan sutures. If I put Beelan sutures first, right, I will have no space or scope of putting Foley's balloon tamponade. So what we are going to prefer as step 1 is Foley's balloon tamponade followed by compression sutures. So the answer will be A.
Wonderful question, ma'am. And definitely, if anyone will get screwed with this. So if examiner wants to screw you, they can screw
Yeah,
anyways.
this was a difficult question for sure.
Moving on to the leaderboard. I think the top few positions I had actually answered it wrong. So only Sai Krishna has jumped to third place because he took this advantage. Indu is the one with the longest streak with 8 streaks. So moving on to the next question.
A 26-year-old sexually active woman presents with lower abdominal pain, fever, and mucopurulent cervical discharge. On bimanual examination, she has cervical motion tenderness and adnexal tenderness. Which of the following is the most likely diagnosis? A. Endometriosis, B. Trichomoniasis, C. Ruptured ovarian cyst, and D. Pelvic inflammatory disease.
And this is one more question where if you lose this question, you're going to jump ranks in thousands.
Yes, correct.
So there is no scope for mistake for such questions. These PYQs and PYTs are the most important questions.
So, congratulations. Most of you have answered it correctly. So, remember, endometriosis will have adnexal tenderness. If may even sometimes have cervical motion tenderness, very rare. But what is a dead giveaway? Cervical motion tenderness at your level, if they give you, please always think PID. Adnexal tenderness can be seen in a variety of conditions. But another hint they are giving you is mucopurulent cervical discharge. She has fever also. We are talking about an infection. Trichomoniasis, remember, it is just a vaginal discharge. It is not a disease of the upper vaginal tract, which usually causes all these systemic symptoms like fever, leukocytosis, and lower abdominal pain. Definitely, you can see vaginal discharge, but you won't see a discharge from the cervix.
Great. So moving on to the leaderboard, there is no change in leaderboard. On YouTube Live, we have got some activity. Thea, Sweetie, and Dream Forever. These three of them have answered it right. The answer is PID. So guys, you can answer in YouTube Live section, comment section. So we'll be giving you a shout out if you give correct answer. There is no negative marking or anything.
A 27-year-old woman at 10 weeks of gestation presents with vaginal bleeding and lower abdominal pain. On examination, the cervix is open. The products of conception are seen at the cervical os. What is the most appropriate diagnosis? Is it a threatened abortion, inevitable abortion, missed abortion, or incomplete abortion?
Yes, this is one more question where I used to get confused during my NEET PG until I understood the concept. So all these appear to be very similar. If you just solve questions, it is very difficult to understand. We hope a proper explanation from you, ma'am, because students will be so much benefited with the proper concept.
Okay, so 17 of you have marked inevitable abortion. There have been 2 threatened, 1 missed, and one incomplete abortion. So remember, always whenever I explain this to people who are asking me, so just think of the kinds of abortion as, a gunda or a mafia. So threatened abortion will be, they are giving you a threat that you do what I am telling you. There will be a threat. What is the threat over here? There is bleeding, right? But if you listen to him, then he's going to stop bothering you. And what does he want? He wants progesterone. So remember, in threatened abortion, there will be bleeding. The fetus will be live, but if you give progesterone, things are going to become better. Inevitable abortion is that gunda who is not interested in your progesterone anymore. He will kill you no matter what. And what makes it inevitable? Inevitable by the fact that the cervix has now opened. This baby is going to die now. So that is inevitable abortion. So, inevitable abortion, remember, just remember one line. If the cervix is open, the abortion must happen. So, in an inevitable abortion, the baby may be live, may be dead, may or may not be bleeding, but the cervix has opened up. So, this abortion will definitely happen. Missed abortion is like that, Russian mafia maybe who will quietly enter the house. Nobody will know that there is any activity, kill the person. 1 week later, the body is found. So, missed abortion will usually have no signs and symptoms, no bleeding. This woman will go for a routine ultrasound. First ultrasound would have shown fetal cardiac activity. Next ultrasound she goes to, she realizes that 2 weeks earlier, the baby has not grown since the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks earlier, the baby has died. Incomplete abortion is when the products will be outside the os. So, incomplete abortion would be the process of abortion has already started in that the products will be outside the os. You might find something in the vagina. Other hints that may be given to you is maybe they will tell you that she is at 12 weeks of gestation, but when you palpate, you find that it is only 8 weeks or 10 weeks. Right, these are the other hints that will be given to you, or you might find that on ultrasound there are some products in the cavity, but it doesn't look like a fetus. So, incomplete abortion, some of the products will already be out. What we see in this question is the cervix has opened, but everything is still inside the uterus or within the cervix. So, this is the answer, inevitable abortion.
Brilliant explanation, ma'am. Brilliant. There's no scope for doubt at all. This mafia example is brilliant. So at the end of 13 questions, we have Vishnu Priya and Mohan Kumar who have a very close-knit competition, followed by Vanaja, Raksha, and Sai Krishna. On YouTube Live, few people have answered it correctly as inevitable abortion. That is Chilvika, Deep, and Komal. Okay, so all these three people have answered the right option.
Great going, guys. Okay, so the next question, a 28-year-old pregnant woman at 24 weeks of gestation presents with increased thirst and frequent urination. Her fasting blood glucose is 95 milligram per deciliter and 2 hours postprandial is 140 milligram per deciliter. What is the most likely diagnosis? Is it gestational diabetes? Is it type 1 diabetes? Is it type 2 diabetes or impaired glucose tolerance?
So this is one question where if you know the answer and you have the fastest fingers, definitely guys, we will be jumping up 1 or 2 positions. So be quick in answering.
So awesome, awesome. Gestational diabetes answered by 5 people. Type 2 by 1 person and impaired glucose tolerance by 5 people. Okay, so look at the hints that are given to you in this question. First of all, the woman is at 24 weeks of gestation. This is the time when your human placental lactogen, which is the hormone responsible for this diabetogenic state in pregnancy, is starting to really pick up its secretion and reach a sort of, not a peak. The peak is at the end of gestation, but it's really spiking. So 24 to 28 weeks is a time when a lot of people will have an unmasking of this tendency to diabetes or gestational diabetes mellitus. She has some symptoms of thirst and frequent urination. Now let's look at her blood glucose. So for the person who has marked type 2 diabetes, remember for type 1 and type 2, which is overt diabetes, we have very, very clear cutoffs. The fasting has to be more than equal to 126 milligram per deciliter. Only then can you call it overt diabetes, which is type 1 or 2. And your 2 hour or random has to be more than 200 milligram per deciliter. HbA1c more than equal to 6.5. Right, over here we see that the fasting is 95, the 2 hour is 140. So let us quickly jog our memory, think about what were the cutoffs for gestational diabetes mellitus. So there were two criteria. One, that we are doing in India according to DIPSI, you give a glucose load. 2 hours later, if it is more than equal to 140, you label as GDM. And of course, there was the other criteria, IADPSG, which a lot of places like INI places are using. They might use this cutoff. So you can make a note of this. So the cutoffs over there was fasting 92, 180 for 1 hour, and 153 for 2 hour. So if any of this one value is deranged, you can go ahead and call it gestational diabetes mellitus. So impaired glucose tolerance, unfortunately, even though GDM is a kind of impaired glucose tolerance, this is not a term that we use in pregnancy.
Yes, ma'am. Nicely explained. So there shouldn't be any scope for any doubts. So at the end of 14 questions, Mohan Kumar is leading, followed by Vishnu Priya. Then we have Rakshaya, Sai Krishna, and Kirtan at fifth place. On YouTube Live, Deep Komal have answered it correctly. That is GDM. So let's move on to the next question, 15th question.
A pregnant woman undergoes an anomaly scan as a part of her routine prenatal care. Which of the following findings is a single most marker which has the highest risk of aneuploidy? Very, very theoretical question. Nuchal fold thickness, short femur, choroid plexus cyst, and absent nasal bone. So, for those of you who don't know, you might have to resort to some guesswork. Not a lot of explanation over here. This is just one of those, typical old neat questions. Either you know or you don't know.
Yes, ma'am. And the options also appear not much related to each other.
Yeah. Okay, still I see an overwhelming majority has marked the correct answer. So remember, choroid plexus cyst out of all four is actually the least dangerous. So there are certain markers like choroid plexus cyst or echogenic focus in the heart, like single umbilical artery. You remember 80% of the time single umbilical artery is going to be nothing. So these three or renal pylectasis, these are things that usually, if present alone, are not associated with aneuploidy at all. You can just reassure the patient if she's gotten her dual screen done or whatever. But all three, the rest of them, they have a significantly higher risk of aneuploidy. Nuchal fold thickness, short femur, absent nasal bone, echogenic bowel, like I was explaining earlier. This is something that you should just know. The one with the highest risk is actually increased NFT more than 6 mm.
Yeah. So moving on to the leaderboard after 15 question. So we have finished 3/4 of the quiz, and right now Mohan Kumar is leading, followed by Vishnu Priya. At third place we have Rakshaya, fourth place we have Kirtana, fifth place we have Vanaja, sixth we have Medha Shravya, seventh Sai Krishna, eighth Giridharan, ninth Aditi, and at 10th place we have Sweetie. So we'll move on with the 5 questions quickly, and then we'll be declaring the winner of this OBG grand finale.
So coming to the next question. A 32-year-old woman delivers a full-term baby via vaginal delivery. The placental examination reveals a thickened irregular margin with a raised edge, and the placental membranes appear to be abnormally adherent. What is the most likely diagnosis based on these findings? Is it a placenta accreta, placenta previa, placenta bilobata, or circumvallate placenta?
I still remember this placenta types is one of the very frequently asked and easy scoring
Yeah,
topics. So I think there are some mnemonics, not mnemonic, there are some images, diagrams where
yeah.
we can easily remember this.
Okay, so 24 have given the correct answer. It's circumvallate placenta. Actually, the one that they try to confuse you with when they put a picture of circumvallate placenta is circummarginate placenta. The difference between the two will be this one has a ridge, that one will be flat. So I think those of you who marked placenta accreta, you marked it because the placental membranes appear to be abnormally adherent was given. So remember, the entire placenta will be adherent, and definitely your placenta won't come out after vaginal delivery. You'll have to go for a hysterectomy. Right, bilobata, again you will see two distinct lobes, and the typical history that will be given to you in bilobeta is, because nobody expects the placenta to have two lobes, right, unless you know it already. So you'll be very happy that I have delivered the baby, I have delivered the placenta, and suddenly she'll have pph. That will not be improving on medical management, because there is some tissue left inside, and when you put your hand inside, you find there is one entire lobe of placenta left behind. So placenta bilobeta and succenturiate placenta can present like this.
Yes. So at the end of 15 questions, we have 16 questions. We have Mohan who is leading, Vishnu Priya, Rakshaya, Medha Shavya who has come to fourth position now, and then Vanaja. Also on YouTube live chat, we have Thea, Deep, and Komal who have answered it correctly as circumvallate placenta. Moving on to the 17th question, three more questions to go, guys.
A 45-year-old woman presents with abdominal distension and a pelvic mass. The ultrasound reveals a solid ovarian tumor, and her ascitic fluid analysis shows no malignant cells. After removal of the ovarian tumor, the ascites resolves. Which of the following is the most likely diagnosis? Is it A, ovarian carcinoma, B, endometriosis, C, Meeks syndrome, and D, pseudomyxoma peritoni?
So this is a clinical based question, but two options are really confusing. So unless they give very much a focus towards each and every word of the question, it's very difficult to solve.
Okay, great going, guys. So, Meek syndrome is the correct answer. The tumor in question is a fibroma. Meek syndrome is basically when you have a fibroma, and with that, you will have ascites and you will have right sided pleural effusion. And typically, if I say a person has ovarian cancer and they have ascites, and if it has malignant cells, it will automatically become stage 1C. Remember, to make it stage 1C, the ascites or the peritoneal washing needs to have malignant cells. Over here, it is not that, right? So it's a 45-year-old, typical age of presentation of fibroma. She has this ascites but no malignant cells, and you remove it, it goes away with the inciting feature factor, that is fibroma. This is typical of Meeks syndrome. They haven't mentioned pleural effusion, but you may have that in the question also. So pseudomyxoma peritoni will not be like that. Pseudomyxoma peritoni, after removal of the tumor, the ascites won't just go away, because remember, pseudomyxoma peritoni, the peritoneum is studded with deposits that is going to keep on causing the recurrence of this ascites. Definitely the ascites won't go away by just removing the tumor.
Moving on to the leaderboard, Mohan is leading, followed by Vishnu Priya, Rakshaya, Medha, and Vanaja. So the leaderboard remains almost the same. On YouTube Live, Thea, Deep, and Komal have again answered it right. That is Meeks syndrome. And Dr. Niranjana right now has the longest streak of 7 questions.
A middle-aged woman with a history of vaginal deliveries presents with a prolapsed uterus. On examination, she is diagnosed with a third-degree uterine prolapse. The surgical procedure commonly used to correct this condition, especially in cases without significant pelvic floor defects, is hysterectomy, vaginal wall suspension, myomectomy, or Fothergill's operation.
So they need to know the degree of prolapse, right, ma'am?
Yeah,
And then what surgical procedure is used for its correction.
yeah. Okay, good, great. So, see, middle-aged woman with hysterectomy, what we have over here is that this is a lady who does not have, she has a prolapse, but she does not have significant pelvic floor defects. So, what it means is that if we just sort of amputate the part that is coming out of the uterus, then we can probably give her a good quality of life. And because her ligaments are already strong, she is likely to not benefit too much from suspension surgeries or sling surgeries, right? So the answer over here will be Fothergill's operation. So remember, if you have a youngish patient who is not very old or does not want to lose her uterus, please go for a Fothergill's operation rather than going straight away for a hysterectomy. The main confusion that arises actually when you have a similar age group patient, just putting a spin on this. For example, the question was, this is a 35-year-old lady who's had previous 2 or 3 vaginal deliveries, and now she's come to you. And now the confusion remains that whether you should go for a sling surgery because she's a young patient, or should you go for a Fothergill's operation. So the two things that will help you decide is sling surgery will be beneficial for a person who has weak supports. For somebody whose supports are fine, over here it is given without significant pelvic floor defects. If her supports are fine, then she will be better off with a cervical amputation without removing the entire uterus. So Fothergill's operation will be there. But do remember, childbearing is going to be difficult with Fothergill's because there is going to be cervical incompetence. And the other thing that should point you towards Fothergill's operation is if the cervix is very long, usually more than 5 centimeters. So we do a sounding and see where, what is the length of the cervix, and accordingly we can decide between the two.
2 more questions to go, and at 18th question, we have Mohan Kumar, who has gained a significant lead, followed by Vishnu Priya, Rakshaya, Medha, and Kirtana. 2 more questions to go, guys. Anything can happen. So,
Okay, you've got to get this right, guys. A 30-year-old woman presents with a twin pregnancy at 12 weeks of gestation. Ultrasound reveals twin peak sign. Which of the following is incorrect in this condition? A, it has a good prognosis. B, delivery by 32 weeks by cesarean section. C, 4 membrane layer between twins. And D, has 2 placentae.
yeah, so this is a combination between radiology and OBG. So you have twin peak sign also, and you have OBG question with 4 options.
Okay, so 18 of you have answered this correctly. So, what are we talking about? What kind of twins are we talking about here? Twin peak sign is basically nothing but fancy name for lambda sign. So, we have two signs, we have lambda and we have T. So, T is, the limb of T is thinner, lambda is sort of looks like a triangle, it's thicker. So, lambda is for your diamniotic dichorionic twins, which is the best kind of twins to have in terms of prognosis. Remember, with more sharing, the worse it becomes. So you fight least with your brother or sister when they are living away from you. Put you in the same house, you will fight more. Give you the same room, you will be tearing each other's hair. So the more the sharing, the worse the prognosis. So this is a good prognosis twins to have. Delivery by 32 weeks by cesarean section are for siblings who are not able to tolerate each other sitting in the same room. We are talking about monoamniotic monochorionic twins. So they are in the same sac, and in the tussle what happens is they are moving around. The liquor is also at a good amount at that time, and their cords get entangled. The knot that is resulting by this entanglement of cords can cause compression of the umbilical vessels and distress in the babies and even their death. So we wait by 32 to 34 weeks, we want to deliver monoamniotic monochorionic twins. So lambda, why it is thicker, twin peak sign, why it is thicker is because there are 4 layers in between. So there's amnion of twin 1, followed by chorion of twin 1, chorion of twin 2, followed by amnion of twin 2. These are the 4 layers that's lying between the two twins. And it definitely has 2 placentae. It is diamniotic, 2 amniotic sacs, dichorionic, 2 placentae.
Excellent, ma'am. Excellent. So at the end of 19 questions, we have Mohan Kumar, who has gained a significant lead. I get this feeling he is going to be the winner, followed by Vishnu Priya, Rakshaya, Kirtana, and Vanaja. So moving to the last question, guys, the last question of the day.
Which of the following is not used for measuring the abdominal circumference in macrosomia condition on ultrasound? Is it portal sinus, stomach, kidney, or umbilical vein? So this is actually more of a radiology question, but also an OBG question. Might be a little difficult for some of you.
Yeah, so I didn't know, like, I know after delivery how we see macrosomia, but I had no idea before delivery also we'll compare it based on organs. So this is your final question for the day, guys.
Oh my God, I'm so impressed. So you guys have marked kidney. So basically, what the question is actually asking over here, which a lot of you may have misinterpreted. Again, this is a difficult question for NEET PG, but do expect the unexpected. Yeah. So what they're asking basically in the question is, when we are looking at the abdominal circumference on ultrasound in a fetus, what all is included in that plane and what should not be present in that plane. That is what it means. So this is again either you know or you don't know question, and the things that should be seen in that ultrasound are: you should not be able to see the heart, you should not be able to see the kidney. What you should be able to see is, you should be able to see the stomach bubble, and you should be able to see the portal sinus and umbilical vein, which when they join together they form a very characteristic J-shaped or hockey shaped sign inside the liver. So this is again an either you know or you don't know question. But remember, you should not be seeing the kidney or the heart.
Awesome. I'm also impressed by the level of questions these guys are answering. So
Yeah,
before this, we had
very
six
impressive.
sessions of OBG divided in various parts. And during that time also we had given tough questions and these guys were above their expectations. So coming to the final leaderboard, it's no doubt Mohan Kumar is the winner of today's quiz, the first cash prize based event of Juxtamate quiz. Mohan Kumar is the winner of OBG Grand Finale. Congratulations, Mohan.
Congratulations.
So Mohan Kumar will be receiving 25% of the total cash money as a cash prize. At second place, we have Vishnu Priya, who is okay. At second and third place, both we have Vishnu Priya and Rakshay. This was actually unexpected. Even though we had 20 questions, still both of them managed to get equal points. So I guess it is proper to declare both of them as runners up. So Vishnu Priya and Rakshaya, both of you are declared as runner up for this quiz.
Congratulations, guys. Great going.
At fourth place, we have Kirtana, Vanaja. At sixth place, we have Meda. Seventh place, Giridharan. Eighth place, Harish. And at ninth and tenth place, we have Kushal and Aditi. So for these people from fourth place to 10th place, you have a special offer. In the upcoming Juxtamate quizzes, you will be given free entry for cash prize based events. So you have gained this, guys. So congratulations. Let's come back to YouTube Live and let's discuss few points with a few important aspects of NEET PG with Dr. Oishika ma'am.
So congratulations to all the winners. All of you are winners in my eyes. There were some very difficult questions there. If from the YouTube live, if anyone has any doubt that they want to clear out, we can utilize this time for that. And the other thing is some important topics that you must read before your NEET PG that are current hot favorites. One of them is shoulder dystocia, breech maneuvers have always been an examiner favorite. Always expect a question. You know, they keep cycling between the different cancers. One year it will be ovarian, the other year it will be cervical, the other year. And one more thing that I get a lot of queries on is the new endometrial cancer staging. Guys, it's very difficult. Even postgraduates don't know it. I don't think even your examiners can remember it. So do not waste your time reading the new FIGO staging of the endometrial cancer. Do not get into that. And I think the rest of you did really well. No notes at all. Just keep doing whatever you're doing because you're obviously doing it right. Just make sure you just read the question very carefully. Not too carefully. Sometimes we tend to overthink कि इतना easy हो नहीं सकता. The question cannot be this easy, and we tend to second guess ourselves. First time we are thinking the right answer. Second time we'll overthink and we'll mark the wrong answer. So don't do that. Your first instinct is your best instinct, of course, unless you're overlooking except what is false instead of true. You're mixing those things up.
So on YouTube live section, ma'am, we are getting so many thank you comments that the one explanation was wonderful and you had explained things in such a simple way. Even I have become a great fan of your teaching. It's really wonderful, ma'am, like to get to learn from you. Also, I guess there will be one more doubt from audience that how can they approach you? How can they text you if they have any doubts or they want to know something from you?
Okay. So I am very approachable on Instagram. My handle is Dr. Oishika, Droishika. So maybe you can put that up so they can Instagram text me. And also currently I am running a batch with Rishabh on. They can also message me on Telegram. That's also fine. And currently with Rishabh, we are heading a batch for the coaching that we are taking called the Sankalp Neat PG batch, where we have daily discussions. And over there, we have a lot of kids who are posting doubts, and we cater to them. And if they want a short explanation, we even do a little, small video. So, but definitely most approachable on Instagram.
Ma'am, can you please brief our audience regarding Sankalp NEET PG?
Okay, so I am currently working at Physics Phala MedEd as an OBG faculty, and we have launched a sort of Telegram support group and TND batch, which is called the Sankalp Neat PG batch. And I'll share the link with you, and maybe you can put it up, or maybe if you Instagram me, I will send you the link. Over there, my husband, Dr. Rishabh Jain, who is the radiology faculty there, and we are sort of helping out the kids who have doubts, and we are asking faculty from other branches who are also working at Physics Phala to take doubt solving sessions. And we have daily sessions and we have a TND going on. So if you have specific doubts or specific things that you want to clarify or any videos that you want, we try to arrange sessions on Telegram.
Great initiative, ma'am. Great initiative. Also, we would be expecting Dr. Rishabh to handle the radio quiz part. So in the next month, we'll be having a radiology quiz, and there's no doubt there won't be any better faculty than Dr. Rishabh for the event. So one of the contestant has called you as Mafia Don of OBJ. So I think that
Yes.
title suits you. So few of them have commented that this was like a mini rapid revision session. So in one session itself, they got to learn so much. Like I got to learn so much about OBG in this. So I can connect that to neonatology and apply during my residency also.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you so much, and I had great fun. It was very nail biting because the points kept going up down like this. I was like, okay, who's going to win?
Yes, ma'am. So I guess our audience had a very good time with us. So thank you, Dr. Oishika ma'am, for accepting our invitation and for arranging this event. So this was the first of its kind, and we'll definitely remember you in the golden pages of JextraMed quiz.
Thank you,
So,
Dr. RMD. Thank you, Dr. Manoj.
so we'll be winding up this session. Anyone of you have any doubts? Don't forget to text Dr. Oishika ma'am on Instagram handle. She is very approachable. She was very approachable to us also. So thank you everyone. Thank you for making this event a wonderful success. So we'll be meeting tomorrow again, guys. And tomorrow's we are starting with forensic medicine. So details will be updated in Telegram group. Thank you, everyone.